Hello and welcome to the first ever Return Week facilitated by the Palestinian Return Center, which seeks to mobilize Palestinians and our allies around the world to call for and support the Palestinian right of return. My name is Nader Ahmoud and I'll be the chair of tonight's event. I am broadcasting live from Chicago, where I established Palestine in America, a nonprofit journalism organization that produces a quarterly print and digital magazine. The purpose of Palestine in America is to give Palestinian journalists an outlet that can jumpstart their career and to educate people in the United States about Palestinians and the issues important to us. If you'd like to learn more about us, subscribe or order individual magazines, please check out PalestineInAmerica.com. Now, before we begin the event, I'd like to talk about the My Return campaign, which is a popular voluntary initiative launched by the London-based Palestinian Return Center in cooperation with national and international pro-Palestinian partners. The campaign was first launched in Jordan in cooperation with the Palestine Committee in the Jordanian Parliament. The campaign culminates in a petition that calls for and reaffirming the Palestinian right of return. The campaign seeks to turn such an inalienable right into an international cause. The campaign seeks to garner the largest possible number of signatures on a petition confirming Palestinian refugees' devotion to their right of return. The petition clearly states that it rejects the U.S. deal of a century and any other initiative undermining Palestinians' internationally guaranteed rights. Israel and the U.S. have never ceased to undermine such an inalienable Palestinian right by denying the refugee status of displaced Palestinians inside and outside occupied Palestine. The US President Donald Trump's recognition of occupied Jerusalem as Israel's capital, the campaign waged by Israel and the US against the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, more formally known as UNRWA, the U.S. suspension of its funding to Palestinian refugees, and the increasing calls to resettle the refugees in destinations other than Palestine are merely tactics which, though seemingly divergent, aim for the same goal, undermining the right of return. And the right of return will never be negotiated away or used as a bargaining chip. The campaign is based on individual signatures on My Return petition through its official website, www.myreturn.net. The petition has already garnered more than 550,000 signatures, so please sign now. You can be proactive in supporting Palestinian human rights, especially the right of return, by signing, or if you have the means, then by donating to one of the most important organizations on the ground supporting Palestinian refugees, UNRWA. Anything you can donate will go a long way. To donate, simply search donate.unrwa.org. And now for today's event, Voices in Exile. Excuse me. We will be hearing about the plight of Palestinians from all around the world, Palestinian refugees under occupation, blockade, caught in the crossfires of civil war, trapped in refugee camps. We will be hearing from Palestinians live from Gaza, Bethlehem, Chile, the UK, Australia, Lebanon, and Jordan. Please leave your questions for our speakers in the comment section, and they will answer them during the Q&A at the end. Now, let's introduce our first speaker, one of many greats. Exile Sayara. She's a social worker, social justice activist, public speaker, and storyteller of Palestinian descent. Exile is immensely passionate about her connection to Palestine and uses this passion to assist her in working closely with diverse communities and closely with refugees from different backgrounds locally and globally, including Jordan, Palestine, Indonesia, and Australia. Hi, welcome. Thanks for joining us today.
Hello, Nader. Thank you so much for the introduction. Good morning, everyone. Sabah al-Khair. I'm tuning in from a region that you all probably know as Sydney, Australia. Though just as Tel Aviv isn't Tel Aviv, it's Tel Rabi', and just as Israel Akid isn't Israel, it's Palestine. Sydney isn't Sydney, it's Jubugali. I would like to take this time to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land I'm tuning in from. I would like to pay my respects to the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. I would like to pass on my respect to their elders past, present, and emerging. This land was and will always be the land of Aboriginal people. Thank you to the Return Centre from London for inviting me to be part of this event. The Israeli occupation's motive and goal is to diminish Palestinians and is to disconnect Palestinians, thinking that if Palestinians are scattered in different parts of the world, then they can't resist against the Israeli occupation. Though today we show the opposite, that no form of power can disconnect Palestinians, especially with the power of Allah's will to connect us, showing that difference in time and location is not a barrier. However, it's a point of connection, making Palestine the core of our connection. My name's Asala Sayara. In English, it's said as Asala Sayara, though I prefer to say Asala Sayara because behind the A is a language that I talk in. It's a language that I dream in and believe in. I'm a social worker. I'm currently working in community development, youth work, and the refugee sector. My experience in social work lies in child protection, mental health, and research, both in Australia and also a little bit of experience in Palestine. I also wear the hat of a social justice resistor, an activist, and a storyteller. My life purpose of fighting for Palestinian rights or the rights of Palestinians and social justice as a whole, and also exceed as a social worker, did not arise in one day or one night. It was a discovery or a conclusion that I had made in my journey in the Palestinian diaspora. My story began in 1997 in the Holy Family Hospital of Beit Lahem in Mustashfa El Faransiya, around 22 kilometers away from my village, Kharas in Khalil. On that day, I was like any other Palestinian firstborn in Palestine, welcomed by the harsh reality of the Israeli occupation. 4 years later, I was a Palestinian living in privilege, but also a Palestinian who was struggling in the diaspora. I lived in Palestine for 2 years and in Jordan for 2 years, and then sought refuge in Australia in 2001 with my family when I was 4 years old. Settling in Australia was a very difficult journey, especially for my parents who had left their home, their families, and were struggling and facing change and difference. And I would say that this is also an intergenerational experience. I myself, growing up in Australia, faced the challenge of difference. Whilst I was trying to find my purpose and understand my identity, living in the diaspora itself was a challenge. When one is in the diaspora, they are faced with difference, either in opinion, appearance, language, and culture. Living in your home country isn't your reality. I'm not saying that if you're living in your home country, you're not facing difference. Obviously, there's different in opinions, there's difference in dialect, you have the Falahi, with Madani, and you have difference of aspect of culture. But amongst that difference, you have the commonality of your national identity, the Palestinian national identity. Growing up in Australia, I didn't have that. Whilst processing who I was, I knew I wasn't Australian. And I knew that I wasn't Lebanese because there's a dominant idea in the community here that all Arabs are Lebanese. I knew that I wasn't Lebanese. I knew that I am Palestinian. As a result of that, I began to vocalize my identity. And it may sound so simple, but reflecting on the lived experience of vocalizing who I am amongst people who had a limited understanding and tolerance towards Palestine was a form of resistance. I say a form of resistance because it was a way to communicate to the Israeli occupation that the young have never forgotten, as they have claimed that the old will die and the young will forget. Well, I was that young person and I had never forgotten Palestine, as Palestine was the core to my existence and is still the core of my existence and purpose. And I would say this was a discovery that was made as a result of being grounded and supported by my parents. The way my parents raised my siblings and I was a way where they didn't only plant the seed, but they had literally held their roots and brought it with them to Australia and passing it on to me, my siblings. And then I realized that this is my identity, an identity which I can never deny. Part of my journey in the diaspora is a physical distance. I'm around 22,000 miles away from Palestine, though that distance has never been a reflection and is still not a reflection of what's in my heart. My heart travels to Palestine every day. And as it travels, I get a call from home telling me, come back, Asala. At times, I can respond to that call. I've been back home numerous times to visit family, to get my Hawiya, my green ID, and even for volunteering. Every trip has its own story of how it has formed a deeper love, connection, and even attachment to my homeland. For the sake of today's talk, I just want to focus on my 2019 trip that I had made with my family. We had traveled to see family, to attend my brother's engagement, and for my nieces to receive the Palestinian passport. Post arriving to the Israeli checkpoint after the King Hussein Bridge in Jordan, my family and I were searched and interrogated. The process of search and interrogation was the optimal definition of degradation. Whilst our hawiyas were taken and placed in a clear bag with our personal belonging, our gold. The Israeli occupier or officer had come back and given us documents written in Hebrew with due tax that had been placed on our personal belongings, based on a policy that was made on the spot. A total amount of $10,000 Australian. During attempted negotiation with the Israeli officer, my mother, who was diagnosed with pneumonia during that time, went unconscious and had a mini stroke. The Israeli officers tried to slow down the process and attempted to strip away our right of return and our sense of belonging. They gave us two options. The first option was to give up on our passport and not pay, and the second option was to not give up on our passports and pay. The obvious decision made was to not give up and pay the tax. This experience forced me to reflect on, where do I belong? Do I belong to my homeland, or do I belong to Australia, where I never felt like I fully belong? I came to the conclusion that my family and I utilized the power of our voice, and realizing that no form of power, no form of abuse of power can strip away my connection and my belonging to my homeland. Recognizing that my sense of belonging to Palestine, to Palestine, is the one of spiritual and emotional belonging, and discovering that my belonging to Australia is one of physical belonging. A belonging that I want to be based on understanding the truth that which is I'm on a stolen land. I pay my respects to all Aboriginal people and want to say that I don't represent the voices of Aboriginal people, though I am an ally. An ally that recognises that Australia and the illegal state of Israel are two settler colonies. After years living here, I have come to know both intimately. While in Australia, I have benefited from the proximity, from the privilege to proximity to whiteness, despite the Islamophobia and surveillance our communities are subjected to. In the illegal state of Israel, I'm an indigenous with no human rights or no legal rights. This is how I have come to frame my political narrative. A Palestinian existing within an Australian context of white supremacy, but also a Palestinian whose heart and mind are always in Palestine. A Palestinian who dreams to return home. And when I'm home, I try to process the reality I'm in. At times I close my eyes and try to have a conversation with the land. This intensity of emotions is rooted in my struggle as a child of the Palestinian diaspora. When you're a child of the Palestinian diaspora, being home becomes a dream. Even in the case when you're physically home, one may question, is this reality? Being positioned this way is a consequence of the Israeli occupation. Returning home isn't just a dream, it is a right, the right of return that many may see as complex. But to me, to fulfill this right, the end of the occupation is the first step to ensure that all Palestinians return back home. How can I not return to a place that my heart is attached to? Even though I can return to my village when I travel to Palestine, but my return means to be home without facing and suffering from checkpoints, from the occupation and dehumanization. My definition of return of home means when all Palestinians return to their stolen homes and their villages. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was so beautifully put. Question before we move on to the next speaker. I know a lot of Palestinians who live in the diaspora might, resonate with some of the things that you might have talked about traveling to Palestine. What can you kind of say to that to kind of keep people from being deterred? Because I know even when I was there last year and at the checkpoint for hours at ends and not being able to go everywhere you want to go in your homeland. But how do you keep fighting and keep traveling there and, keeping your head held high?
There's something that I always say to everyone, to Palestinians, but also to non-Palestinians when I try to encourage them to go to Palestine. The pain, the suffering, and the challenges that you face when you travel to Palestine are all worth it when you get there. And I think when you travel, if you travel to Palestine the first time, there will be some form of connection that will tie you back. Even when you may be telling yourself unconsciously, this might not be a place to be in, but you will eventually have something that will tie you back. I think a part of my answer could involve also that as a Palestinian, you are responsible. Something that I discovered whilst I was living in Australia is that the privilege that I have, whether my privilege of using my voice or my privilege of education or my privilege in the freedom of movement, don't abuse that privilege. Utilize that privilege in a way that you can bring something to your own people, but also bring something to your own self. Don't diminish your own self from that experience.
Right.
Palestine is a whole other world. You must see it.
Fantastic. Great. Very well put. Thank you so much for your time and for joining us tonight. Our next speaker another great speaker we got lined up for you. Lorena Musa is the president of the General Union of Palestinian Students of Chile and an outspoken activist of the BDS movement in Chile. She is also an anthropology student, part of the Palestinian community of Chile, which is the largest Palestinian community outside the Arab world. Lorena has a Spanish to English interpreter joining her today, and we'd like to thank you again, Lorena, for joining us, and thank you.
Bueno, muchas gracias. Primero, quiero agradecer la invitación. Creo que estas instancias son muy importantes porque logran conectar a la diáspora en el mundo, compartir experiencias, visiones, en este caso, en mi caso, desde Chile, un país que tal vez es muy lejano físicamente. Sin embargo, para las y los palestinos, Chile tiene y representa una gran comunidad. De hecho, el polerón que hoy llevo es el polerón del equipo de fútbol palestino que ha sido reconocido mundialmente y que nos conecta también a nivel mundial. Como les decía, Chile tiene una gran comunidad, la comunidad más grande fuera del mundo árabe, ya que la migración hacia acá, incluso anterior a la creación del Estado de Israel, empezaron a migrar palestinos hacia Chile, y Chile después del 48 se convierte en la mayor comunidad de palestinos fuera del mundo árabe. Obviamente, por la desposesión y la limpieza étnica, el número empezó a aumentar y hoy nos posiciona como la comunidad más grande fuera del mundo árabe.
For many, it must be a very strange place, Chile, such a faraway land, such a faraway country. But actually, Palestinians represent a very important part of the Chilean idiosyncrasy and of the Chilean culture. The t-shirt I'm wearing in this very precise moment is the shirt from the football team called Palestino, one of the most important football teams in our country. Chile has also one of the biggest Palestinian communities outside of the world, in the world, and it's actually the biggest Palestinian community outside of the Arab world. Even before the creation of the State of Israel, many Palestinians decided to come to this land, to Chile.
En el caso de los refugiados, llegan a Chile en el año 2008, en el caso de los refugiados palestinos que viven en Chile, desde la UNRWA, de ACNUR y de la Vicaría y el gobierno de Chile, quienes juntos trabajan para poder mantener aquí a un grupo de 114 palestinos que venían desde Palestina en el 2008, y se le entrega ayuda humanitaria, manutención. Hay poca asistencia para la adaptación y la gestión de arriendo, los permisos y aprender el idioma en el caso de los refugiados. Entonces, hoy se enfrentan también a un choque cultural muy latente. Ha sido súper complejo el proceso en que los refugiados desplazados desde Palestina, muchos han sido refugiados 2 veces, desde otro país del mundo árabe y luego a Chile. Y en este caso la comunidad palestina en Chile ha sido también muy potente para poder integrarlo a nuestra sociedad.
In the case of the refugees, of the Palestinian refugees in our land, in Chile, many came since 2008. There are 114 Palestinians that we have received since that year in Chile. The church has been of great help because in Chile, as a neoliberal country, the state does not guarantee these refugees any basic rights. That's why, and also there has been in some cases many cultural fights between the Palestinians and local populations. There is very little help from the state, as I told you, to help them adapt and to help them actually make links with the people of Chile. They, in many cases, they are double refugees because they were refugees in the first place from their motherland, which is Palestine, and then they were again refugees coming from their first country of refugee to another country, which is Chile.
Cabe señalar también que Chile es un país neoliberal, tiene un costo de vida muy alto y en donde todos los derechos sociales básicos están privatizados. Por lo tanto,
Chile is a neoliberal country, therefore it's very difficult for even the Chilean people, so even more for the refugees, to have access to the basic rights.
esto afecta, por supuesto, a la población general en Chile y acceder, por ejemplo, a una universidad sin créditos o becas es demasiado costoso. Y los espectadores que me están escuchando podrán entender que para un palestino que llega muchas veces sin manejar el idioma, obteniendo un trabajo precarizado, se vuelve totalmente imposible. Por tanto, el Estado chileno es también quien imposibilita la posibilidad de tener un futuro mejor o una vida digna, mientras los refugiados esperan una solución que pueda revertir su situación.
Chile, as a neoliberal country, the general population has, as I already told you, many difficulties to access to different basic rights. One of them being the education and the university education. The tuition fees in Chile are extremely expensive. So you can imagine that for a Palestinian, who many come to Chile with no money, it's even more difficult for them to have access to the universities. Therefore, it is the responsibility of the Chilean state, or the irresponsibility of the Chilean state, the fact that many of the Palestinians, and especially the young people that could go to the university, they don't feel like they are part of our society because they have a lack of university education.
Sin embargo, si yo toco el tema de Chile es porque obviamente yo vivo acá, de Palestina llegó mi abuelo y mi bisabuelo. Si toco el tema de Chile es porque estoy aquí y veo las problemáticas que surgen a partir de la migración de palestinos y de refugiados de Palestina a Chile.
If I talk about Chile, it's because my grandfather, because my great-grandfather and my grandfather both came from Palestine to Chile, and it's inevitable for me to talk about the Chilean problems, especially when the structural problems of my country, of Chile, affect especially the refugees, in this case, the Palestinian refugees.
Pero nosotros como comunidad palestina tenemos muy en claro que el problema no es el Estado de Chile, sino que es el Estado de Israel.
But we as a Palestinian community here in Chile are very clear with this point, that the main aggressor and the main responsible of the Palestinian refugee problems is not the state of Chile, but is obviously the state of Israel.
En ese sentido, me gustaría destacar una cosa, que UNRWA, que es la agencia de la ONU para la población refugiada de Palestina en Medio Oriente, se crea en el año 1949 y de hecho se crea un día como hoy, un 8 de diciembre, con un mandato inicial de 3 años.
Then I would like to highlight the following. In 1949, UNRWA is created in such a day like today, the 8th of December of 1949.
Porque se pensó en ese momento que en 3 años se llegaría a una solución para los 700.000 refugiados de Palestina en ese entonces. Sin embargo, vamos a cumplir 73 años de ocupación de la creación del Estado de Israel y cada 3 años este mandato se ha tenido que renovar ante el problema de refugiados palestinos, los que actualmente presentan no 700.000 como fueron inicialmente, sino que ya son más de 5,6 millones de refugiados palestinos en el mundo.
Therefore, it's important to say that when UNRWA was created, it was thought that this was going to be a mission of approximately 3 years, when there was 700,000 Palestinian refugees. But now there has been 73 years going on, and the Palestinian refugee subject has now go forward from 700,000 Palestinian refugees to 5.6 million Palestinian refugees.
En ese sentido, Israel, además de violar el derecho internacional, mantener un apartheid en Palestina y no acatar las resoluciones de la ONU, es el responsable directo de esta migración forzada hasta el día de hoy.
In that sense, if you have a country that violates systematically and constantly the UN resolutions and which systematically violates the human rights of Palestinians, the main responsible is obviously the state of Israel.
Ujú. Es por esto que la solución para los refugiados, lo que creemos desde la comunidad palestina de Chile, tiene que pasar por el derecho a retorno con garantías. El derecho al retorno ha sido la piedra angular de la lucha palestina bajo el principio de que los refugiados palestinos tienen derecho a retornar a su patria.
Therefore, we, as the Palestinian community here in Chile, do believe that the main way, the main solution that there is to the Palestinian refugee crisis is the right to return. And it's a right to return with different guarantees that the international community and the state of Israel must guarantee to the Palestinians.
Yo tengo un caso muy personal y que también le ha pasado a otras personas aquí palestinas de origen, chilenos de origen palestino. En el caso mi hermana, que la deportaron en el 2014 porque intentó ir a ver a nuestra familia en Palestina y no pudo. Entonces, el derecho a retorno que también deberíamos tener los bisnietos o nietos de palestinos, siendo que yo no soy refugiada, sin embargo soy descendiente directa, no tengo el derecho de poder ir, de poder conocer a mi familia. Yo nunca he estado en Palestina porque probablemente si intento entrar no me van a dejar, me van a tener 12 horas interrogándome, me van a intentar revisar mi mail, mis redes personales, porque eso es lo que han hecho no solo con los palestinos directos que intentan entrar, sino también con los descendientes, con los chilenos de origen palestino.
In that sense, I have a personal account. My own sister in 2014 tried to go to Palestine and visit my family in Palestine, but she couldn't go in because the state of Israel wouldn't let her go in. Therefore, I don't have the right to go see my own family. I can't go and meet my own family.
En ese sentido, Israel, que ya vamos a cumplir 73 años de ocupación, ha negado este derecho que según las Naciones Unidas y según la ley internacional no prescribe con el tiempo. Y me gustaría decir que no podemos esperar que hayan personas que hayan vivido toda su vida, hayan muerto en otro lugar que no les pertenece, que hayan sido refugiados sin poder retornar a su hogar. Lo que también ha provocado que hijos, nietos y bisnietos sigan siendo refugiados, ya que según el derecho internacional es refugiada la persona que sufre el desplazamiento y también sus descendientes hasta que se encuentre una solución a la situación. Solución que hasta el día de hoy no existe para los palestinos.
So it's not only that directly the Palestinians, those who fled, those who were exiled by the Israeli forces in 1948 or later, it's not only that they cannot enter Palestine, but it's also their granddaughters and their grandsons and their great-grandsons and great-granddaughters. We can't accept, we can't tolerate, and we can't keep waiting for so many Palestinians to be in exile, and we can't tolerate them to stay in exile and without the right of returning.
Como no se ha encontrado ninguna solución, es la agencia humanitaria la que intenta mantener condiciones de vida digna para la población refugiada palestina. Sin embargo, si nosotros les preguntamos a las palestinas y los palestinos qué es para ellos una vida digna, evidentemente nos van a responder el derecho a retornar a mi hogar. Y ese hogar es Palestina.
Although many states are responsible of the living conditions of Palestinians, if one asks a Palestinian refugee, what is dignity? What is a dignified life? They would most certainly tell you a dignified life would be one of returning to my homeland, to my motherland, which is Palestine.
Por tanto, ya no podemos seguir esperando desde Israel una solución si ellos no han sido capaces de comportarse como un Estado normal. Israel es el país más anormal. Israel no quiere la paz, no reconoce la existencia del pueblo palestino y han desacatado todas las resoluciones de las Naciones Unidas en su contra. Es por esto que es también una responsabilidad de la comunidad internacional buscar una solución a los más de 5,6 millones de refugiados en el mundo.
Therefore, we cannot expect Israel to give us the solutions. Israel is not only not a normal country, but it is an abnormal country. They cannot give us solutions because They don't respect the United States resolutions. They don't want peace. They don't even recognize the Palestinian people. Therefore, it should be the UN and the UNRWA who gives the Palestinian people the concrete solutions.
Nosotras y nosotros como jóvenes de la diáspora palestina en Chile, hemos visto en el BDS, en la campaña BDS, una herramienta que permite luchar por una solución para el pueblo palestino.
We, as the young people and the youth people in Chile and of the Palestinian community in Chile, we have found in the BDS a legitimate and a good tool to fight against the occupation and apartheid in Israel.
El BDS, como les decía, es una herramienta que lo que hace es presionar a los estados mediante el boicot y las sanciones para que Israel cumpla con el derecho internacional y deje de violar los derechos humanos.
BDS is an international campaign, and it is a tool which helps Israel follow the international law and slowly give the Palestinians back their rights.
La idea con esta campaña es que todos los estados del mundo que dicen que respetan los derechos humanos rompan relaciones con Israel. Justamente uno de los objetivos que hay detrás del BDS es el de respetar, proteger y promover los derechos de las y los refugiados palestinos a regresar a sus hogares, tal como fue estipulado en la resolución 194 de la ONU.
One of the main objectives of the BDS campaign is to make effective the observation of the refugee rights of Palestinians in the different parts of the world.
Pero para que ese retorno suceda, tiene que existir la presión de la comunidad internacional, más allá de que seamos los palestinos los que nos organizamos en cada país. La comunidad internacional también tiene que tomar una postura ante un estado de apartheid en el mundo.
For this to be successful, it's not only necessary for the Palestinian communities and Palestine to be mobilized, but it is also necessary for the international community to fight alongside the Palestinian people.
Naciones Unidas también tiene el deber, ya que Israel es el único estado ficticio que ha sido creado por las Naciones Unidas, sin embargo, no ha acatado ninguna de sus resoluciones desde la creación.
UN has the responsibility to make Israel, which has been and is still the only country created by this organism, to be the one to enforce the international law and to make Israel respect and follow international law.
Sancionar y juzgar también a los criminales de guerra creemos que es el paso mínimo para poder tener paz en Palestina.
Sanction and make judgments of those criminals of laws is one of the many steps to ensure a true peace in Palestine.
Eso es por lo que hemos estado luchando aquí en Chile, desde nuestra comunidad palestina, desde distintas áreas de la sociedad, nosotros como estudiantes, pero también desde el Congreso, desde la misma comunidad y las actividades culturales que nos hacen reunirnos.
That is what we have done here in Chile, the youth organizations, also in Congress, and the Palestinian community in Chile, which is very, very large, to try to help and fight alongside the Palestinian people.
Sabemos que retornar al hogar tiene que significar una solución para todo el pueblo palestino, y esa solución es una vida digna, una vida libre de violencia y ocupación y apartheid.
We know then that what we seek is a dignified life for Palestinians and a life without violence and a life without apartheid.
Eso.
Thank you so much for that very informative and thought out explanation, and for giving us an update on what's going on in Chile. I know a lot of us are unaware to, that large community that's out there. I remember first learning about it when I was in college and being very surprised, but there's a long history of Palestinians, just like you mentioned, in Chile. So it was very great to hear from you. Thank you so much. Now, just a few reminders before we move on to our next speaker. Please head to www.myreturn.net to sign the My Return petition. And if you have the means, please head to donate.unrwa.org to donate to UNRWA. Now for our next speaker, very, very excited about this next speaker. Hanan Hroub is a Palestinian teacher who in 2016 was the winner of the Global Teacher Prize. She specializes in supporting children traumatized by violence. She grew up in the Daesha Palestinian refugee camp near Bethlehem, where she experienced and saw violent acts, and her own children were traumatized by a shooting incident in which her husband was shot in his car on an Israeli army checkpoint. Hanan will be joined by an Arabic to English interpreter. Salam alaikum, Hanan,
Salam
and
alaikum.
welcome. Thank you. Alaikum salam.
I will start. Can start? No?
Yes, please. Salam
The
alaikum.
translator direct. Talk.
You can speak in Arabic, and then the interpreter will translate.
Okay. Thank you. مساء الخير. أعرفكم على نفسي في البداية. اسمي حنان حامد عبد الله الحروب من قرية القبو المهجرة عام 1948 والواقع على مشارف مدينة القدس. ولدت في مخيم دهشة للاجئين الفلسطينيين على أراضي مدينة بيت لحم مهد السيد المسيح عليه السلام. حقيقة وجدت نفسي هذا المساء أمام موضوع أعادني بالذاكرة لأزقة وطرقات مخيم احتوى تحت سقوفه أطفالاً بيعودوا في أصولهم ل 28 قرية مهجرة بفعل الاحتلال الإسرائيلي للأراضي الفلسطينية عام 48 مثل عين كارم، زكريا، بيت جبرين، القبو وغيرهم كثار. إذا راقبنا المشهد العالمي بشكل جيد بنشوف إنه الفلسطيني الوحيد اللي استطاع إنه يحول الألم والمعاناة إلى أمل. وما تسألوا الفلسطيني كيف، هي منحة بتمنحها فلسطين لأبنائها. فبداخلنا إيمان قوي، إيمان بأننا في يوم من الأيام نرجع ونستعيد كل ما سلب منا. ما تسألوا اللاجئ الفلسطيني عن طفولته. أطفال فلسطين يعني يولدون كباراً. كبرت على تفاصيل يومية صاغها الاحتلال الظالم من حظر تجول، اعتقالات، قتل، قنابل غاز، هدم، مشاهد ضرب واعتقال بشكل يومي. رسمنا كأطفال فلسطينيين في المخيم وكشباب فلسطينيين مفاتيح عودتنا لقرانا المهجرة على جدران مدرستنا. رسمنا مستقبلنا اللي ما زال ترنح بين قرارات الدول اللي ساهمت في نكبتنا وألحقت فينا كل أشكال الأذى، وبفعل كل ما لحق فينا من فقر وقهر وتشرد. لكن كان في هالمدرسة بصيص نور وأمل إلنا بمستقبل أفضل. بالرغم من أنه الاحتلال ما تردد للحظة ولا توانى للحظة في إغلاق مدارسنا، وكان يستخدمها كوسيلة وكسياسة تجهيل لأبناء شعبنا. ولكن بالرغم من كل هالممارسات للاحتلال تغلبنا عليه في التعليم الشعبي. درست في حارات وأزقة المخيم على أيدي معلمين عظماء، تعلمت منهم كثير، وبجوز إلهم الفضل اللي وصلت له اليوم. نلمس مفارقة غريبة ومريرة بين اللي كنا نرسمه على الجدران من استنكار للي صار معنا، ومع إصرار على استعادة حقوقنا في العودة لأراضينا، وبين اللي بنرسمه من مستقبل قادر على إبراز هويتنا الوطنية والإنسانية. هالمساء اللي أعادني بالذاكرة لأنشودة كانت في كتاب الصف الثاني بعنوان حنان يا صغار عصفورة النهار تلون الرسوم تضيء كالنجوم. شعرت في هذاك الوقت إنه هالأنشودة بذرة لحلم كبير بدت في داخلي، ولكن كيف لهالبذرة تنمو وتكبر وتصير حقيقة؟ أنا فتحت عيني في مخيم للاجئين بتشرد وفقر ولجوء ومعاناة وظلم وقسوة وجبروت احتلال. ما شتتنا وهجرنا من أراضينا فقط، هو مستمر لغاية اليوم، لغاية اللحظة في ملاحقتنا في كل أماكن تواجدنا في الوطن وفي الشتات. سرق أحلامنا وفرحنا وأعمارنا وطفولتنا وشبابنا. هالمدرسة كانت بصيص نور لإلي، يعني لازم أتعلم، لا أغير من هال الحياة، لا بدي نظرة للمستقبل، لازم أتعلم. ضمن 11 ولد وبنت فرص ضعيفة لإكمال دراستي، أنهيت ثانوية عامة وكانت الجامعات مغلقة منذ 3 سنوات بسبب إغلاقات الاحتلال. تزوجت بعمر 18 وبعمر 25 كنت أم ل5 أطفال، فصار حلمي إني أتعلم وأكمل تعليمي بعيد كثير، ولكن الحياة في المخيم بتعلمنا كثير أمور، من بينها إنه يكون عندك بدائل وحلول لكل المشكلات والعقبات اللي بتواجهك. ففي عندي خطة A وخطة B. فقلت بالأول بحقق حلمي في أولادي، في أطفالي، إنهم بتعلموا، بعلمهم أولاً وبعدين بأجل حلمي شوي ليصير الوقت المناسب. بعمر 30 رجعت للجامعة والتحقت بالجامعة أكثر من 4 مرات وأنسحب من أجل أولادي، ولكن بالمرة الأخيرة برجع لمقاعد الدراسة وبكون طالبة في الجامعة وبتحقق الحلم. ويبدو أن الفلسطيني لما بده يحقق حلم بصعوبة يحققه. بعد عام دراسي حادثة بتغير مصيري ومصير أسرتي، بتوقف عن الدراسة وواجه فقدان حلمي لأتعلم مرة أخرى وأغير من مستقبلي. بصراحة ما توقعت حنان الطفلة اللي كبرت وصارت صبية وتزوجت وإنها تنجب أطفال وأطفالها يعيشوا المعاناة اللي عاشتها بكل تفاصيلها مثل ما عاشتها هي. كان عندي أمل إنه أطفالي ما يعيشوا نفس المعاناة اللي عشتها. مشهد نتخيله مع بعض: مجموعة من جنود الاحتلال أقاموا حاجز عسكري، تجمعت سيارات فلسطينية، أول سيارة سيارة زوجي وولادي، أطفالي راجعين من المدرسة مع والدهم، بتشاوروا الجنود مع بعض، بوجهوا البنادق، بتلقوا الرصاص، بغادروا وهم يضحكوا. النتائج بتعرض لزوجي لإصابة، أطفالي بنجوا، أطفالي بمعجزة إلهية من رصاص الاحتلال، بنادق وجهت في وجه أطفال. الصدمة كانت عنيفة وقاسية. حدا يوجه بندقية نحوك ويطلق الرصاص عليك وتشاهد أحب الناس لإلك مصاب وتواجه خطر فقدانه، صدمة قوية دمرتهم نفسيا أكاديميا. صار المهم عندي يتعافوا نفسيا ويرجعوا أطفال طبيعيين، ولاحقا بعالج الوضع الأكاديمي. منتهى القسوة والألم تشوف أولادك بضيعوا أمام عينيك. تحولت لمرشد نفسي لأطفالي ومعلم وكل إشي بيخطر على بالكم. نجحت ولكن مش بهالسهولة اللي بحكي فيها. زاوية من بيتنا صارت صف، أحرف، أرقام، ألوان، كلمات، حولت ألعابهم لأنشطة، حتى كنت أمثل لهم دروسهم بالدمى. حاولت أستخدم الألوان اللي أنا اعتدت في المخيم على جدران رمادية اللون، إلا إني قدرت أساعد أولادي بالألوان اللي هي أنا مؤمنة دائما أنها بتحرر الأطفال من الغضب والخوف، من العنف اللي تعرضوا له، من كثير مشاعر سلبية، وبحل محلها وبتمنحنا فرح وإيجابية. نجحت مع أطفالي، ولكن كان بمر شريط أمام عيني: كل أطفال فلسطين بيتعرضوا لعنف من الاحتلال الإسرائيلي كل يوم وبأشكال مختلفة وبشكل مباشر وغير مباشر. بواجهوا مصير ممكن يتلقوا مساعدة وممكن ما يتلقوا مساعدة، وممكن نخسر أهم استثمار إلنا وإحنا بنملكه كفلسطينيين. أصغر أسير فلسطيني 8 سنوات دخلوا يعتقلوه قبل كم شهر، دخلوا على مدرسته الابتدائية يعتقلوه 8 سنوات، وقبل كم يوم استشهاد طفل بعمر 13 عام. بعد سنة من تعافي أطفالي رجعت للجامعة وغيرت تخصصي لتدريس الأطفال، وتخرجت ودخلت الصفوف الدراسية ونقلت التجربة مع أولادي، مع أطفالي اللي استخدمتها مع أطفالي لصف الدراسي. نلعب ونتعلم بدأت في بيتي وانتقلت لصف الدراسي. أنا مدرسة أطفال، وأكثر ما بيحبوا الأطفال اللعب اللي هو سمة هالمرحلة. من حق كل طفل يكبر وينمو نمو طبيعي، من حق كل طفل يلعب، ومش من حق أي حدا يسلبه هالحق. يلعب، يكتشف من خلال اللعب زملائه ومشاعره، ويكتشف كل الظواهر المحيطة فيه، لغته، ثقافته، هويته، إنسانيته. من حق كل طفل يتعلم بأمان وسلام وفرح. من حق كل طفل مدرسة آمنة جاذبة. كان صعب إنه نوفر، ولليوم صعب نوفره لأطفالنا. طورت اللعب ليتناسب مع احتياجات طلابي والبيئة اللي بيعيشوا فيها، وأطلقت منهجية نلعب ونتعلم، منهجية قائمة على الألعاب والأنشطة والرسم والموسيقى والرقص والغناء. فرح، حياة مليئة بالفرح داخل الصف الدراسي. بتعلم الطفل كيف يكون اجتماعي رغم وجود الاحتلال. بنربي أطفالنا على القيم الإنسانية. ما في ضمان إنه طلابي ممكن يرجعوا لي ثاني يوم أو بكرة. ما في ضمان ممكن أشوفهم ثاني يوم. من الممكن أن يعتقلوا، من الممكن يستشهدوا. ما بضمن. اللي بقدر أضمنه أنهم يعيشوا أجمل لحظات حياتهم داخل صفهم الدراسي. وفرت لهم بيئة آمنة جاذبة بتوفر فيها السلام، الأمان، الفرح المفقود خارج جدران الصف. لما بوصلك طفل عيونه مليانة دموع، بالليل جنود الاحتلال هدموا بيته، دمروا ذكرياته، صور وألعابه، أو فقد أحد أفراد أسرته، سهل تمسح دموعه، ولكن صعب تمسح وجع وألم في قلبه. هو حامله معه، حامل فيه كل هالألم وكل هالمعاناة. ترجع له ابتسامته وترجع له ابتسامته، ويبدأ من جديد، وتزرع في داخله بذرة أمل بمستقبل جديد ومشرق، ويواجه بقوة وصلابة. بهمني يتعافوا نفسيا من أذى الاحتلال وعنفه. بعلمهم كيف ينهضوا من جديد مثل طائر الفينيق. على السبب نقول بدنا معلم، ومش أي معلم، معلم حر اللي بيقدر ينشئ أجيال شجاعة مناضلة من أجل تحرير فلسطين، الأرض والإنسان، ويرجع المسلوب. حررت نفسي وطلابي من قوانين المناهج ووضعت طلابي قوانيننا ومناهجنا الخاصة فينا. الاحتلال ممكن يدمر بيوتنا، ممكن يقتل أشجارنا، ولكن لا يمكن أنه يوئد ويقتل أحلامنا بداخلنا. وكل يوم في حلم جديد، فبنيت أو زرعت بذرة جديدة لحلم جديد. هالحلم هالمرة أشركت فيه طلابي، لأنه هالمرة لفلسطين. بال2015 شفت نانسي أتولي الفائزة الأمريكية بأفضل معلم في العالم واقفة مع زملائها على المنصة في دبي، وقلت ويا إلهي، أكيد في معلم، لو في معلم فلسطيني واقف بينهم أكيد في معلم بيستاهل. تخيلت نفسي واقفة بينهم ولابسة الثوب الفلسطيني. ولما تقدمت الجائزة بعام 2016 كنت فقط إنه توصلني رسالة: حنان، نهنئك، تمت اختيارك من أحسن معلم في العالم. عارفين شو بيعني اختيار معلم فلسطيني من بين الآلاف من المعلمين المتميزين في بلدانهم؟ وقفت أنافس على لقب أفضل معلم في العالم، حاملة معي آلام ومعاناة شعبي. فرح وحزن 13 مليون فلسطيني مر بشريط أمام عيني. الناس الموجودة في القاعة لحظة الفوز كانت تصفق لي، وأنا ما كنت أشوف إلا دموع أمهات الشهداء والأسرى والجرحى. استثمرت في لحظة الفوز الفرصة التاريخية أن فلسطين يتحدث ويسمعوا الملايين من العالم. لحظة تاريخية كان علي أرسل جميع الرسائل اللي بتخطر في بال وذهن 13 مليون فلسطيني في الوطن وفي الشتات. وأهم رسالة: لا يمكن أن ننعم العالم بالسلام إذا الفلسطيني ما عاش بسلام. طالما الفلسطيني مسروق حقه بأرضه ومسروق حقه بالحياة، إنه يعيش مثله مثل الآخرين بسلام. الفوز ما كان النهاية، كان بداية لطريق جديد صعب، كثير صعب لما يكون فلسطيني الفائز. ممكن يكون الفائز من أي دولة في العالم، لكن ما بيواجه صعوبات مثل اللي بيواجهها فلسطين. الأهم إني قدرت أكتب اسم وطني فلسطين على خريطة العالم ولأول مرة. تبادر لذهني لو فكرنا كل فلسطيني يفكر شو بده يقدم لفلسطين، مش شو بده ياخذ منها، كان كثير أمور تغيرت بحياتنا. علمت طلابي كيف يحلموا أحلام تحتضن أحلام وطنهم وأبناء شعبهم. مثل هيك أحلام هي اللي بتتحقق. علمتهم كيف يحرروا أنفسهم من الألم وحولوها لأمل. في صف الدراسي حطت والدي وعكاله ومفتاح بيت جدي في قريتي القبو، لأروي لكل جيل من الأطفال اللي بدخلوا صف الدراسي قصة ورواية هالمفتاح على مدى أكثر من 72 سنة. طفولة المخيم هي قصة حلم ما زالت تمسك بمفتاح العودة، لتستيقظ كل يوم الصبح إما على أمل إنه هنا في نور في آخر الطريق، في نور في آخر هالنفق بيضيء لهالأطفال دروب وطرق المستقبل بنزاهة وأمل. كيف نفكر ممتلكات شعب أكمله بتسرق وتنهب وتغتصب أمام العالم بدون ما يتحرك؟ بالعكس، بجوز البعض ساعد ودعم وعزز هالسرقة والاغتصاب لفلسطين، الأرض والإنسان. من حقنا إنه ومن حق كل فلسطيني وفي كل مكان يعود إلى أرض آبائه وأجداده الموروثة منذ آلاف السنين من حقي أطالب العالم اليوم وكل يوم بوقف فيه على منصة بتحدث فيها تحقيق العدالة وإعادة الحقوق لأصحابها، لنتجنب الحروب والدمار، ومن أجل تحقيق السلام العادل مش بس في فلسطين وحدها، في كل مكان في العالم. من حق أطفالنا يلعبوا ويتعلموا ويكبروا ويحبوا وينحبوا مثلهم، مثل كل أطفال العالم. الأطفال اللي هجروا وشردوا سلبت حقوقهم، طفولتهم وابتساماتهم. على أرضنا وئدت طفولتنا في مهدها. على أي أرض؟ على الأرض اللي ستحتفل بعد أيام قليلة بعيد ميلاد السيد المسيح عليه السلام، على الأرض التي تقول المجد لله في الأعالي، وعلى الأرض السلام وفي الناس المحبة. شكرا لكم على الدعوة، وشكرا أنكم أتحتوا لي هالفرصة لأتحدث اليوم وأشارك الفلسطينيين في كل أنحاء العالم لرواية أو واحدة من الروايات، واحدة من القصص الفلسطينية من بين ملايين القصص الفلسطينية. مع المحافظة رغم كل هالألم اللي تغلفت فيها القصص الفلسطينية، الفرح والأمل اللي بداخلنا اللي ما بنفقده دائما. سنعود يوما، بجوز مش اليوم، وبجوز مش بجيلي أنا، وبجوز مش بجيل أولادي، ولكن سنعود يوما. شكرا لكم، شكرا كثير، ويسعد مساكم جميعا، وكل عام وانتم بألف خير. احنا على أبواب الأعياد، إن شاء الله عام جديد يكون مليء بالفرح والمحبة والسلام العادل في كل مكان في العالم، وخاصة بفلسطين. كل عام وانتم بخير وبصحة وعافية يا رب. شكرا جزيلا لكم.
شكرا.
Hanan Hamid Abdullah Al-Hurub. She lives on the outskirts of Jerusalem. She talks about her experience where she grew up in a camp with many children coming from many different villages where they were displaced. Palestinians in the camp, or Palestinian children, held on to the hope regardless of the pain. They always believe that they will return and that they should retrieve all their rights. She talks about her experience of growing up in a refugee camp with many hardships that stole many children's dreams, childhood, and even youth. And in the midst of all of that, education was the only hope that they had in the school, in the campsite. They were girls and boys who held on to their dreams and saw education as an escape out of the hardships of that refugee. She talks about her experience of being married at the age of 18 and being a mother of 5 at the age of 25. In the camps, she says, we learned to struggle and strive. And she was prioritizing her children, and she left education for a while, but then she was always keen on returning to it. So in her 30s, she returned to universities, and even if she had gaps in her education due to the childcare, she had to look after her children amidst those hard conditions. She never deserted her education, and it was the only hope that she held on to be able to retrieve the pain and the despair that they lived through. She never expected that her children will grow in exactly the same circumstances that she grew up. She always hoped that circumstances would change, but then her children went through the exact same struggles and hardships she grew up as a child. Her children and husband were faced with Israeli soldiers in the car on their way back from school, and they pointed guns at them where her husband was injured and her children were terrorized. They were mentally traumatized, and then she had to leave the education behind and bring in a healing or a specialist program to treat the trauma that her children went through. She was very patient in trying to make her children forget the experience that they felt, that they experienced, and the violation of the Israelis that they underwent. She talks about the children being terrorized and violated in Palestine, where she talks about the youngest prisoner who was only 8 years old when they went to his school and they took him from his classroom, and ranging to the age of 13. She talks about her experience as a teacher, and she emphasizes on the right of all children to play and discover, and this is what she created, the scheme of play and learn. And she emphasizes on the rights of Palestinian children to learn in a peaceful surrounding, away from all the trauma that they face under the Israeli occupation. Learning in her school was based on being social, teaching the children to be social and to respect human values. She always knew that some of her children might never come the next day due to the occupation and the violence they faced. And she knew that many might become martyrs. And she always had children coming back the next day with tears because their house was demolished, or someone has died in their families, or they were terrorized by the occupation. And she always had to take them out of that and give them an experience living in the school, in the boundaries of safety of their school, to dream and to have hope, and to change the trauma that they go through, and to give them some safety and some childhood and a time to play. She used music, she used dancing to make them forget, to make them, at least for the few hours they exist in school, to focus on their childhood and forget the occupation outside their school. She installed a special curriculum that was specially designed for Palestinian children, where she needed to implant a new dream. She imagined herself winning an award of the best educator, standing with her Palestinian dress amongst many others to put Palestine on the map, and she did. And she said, when people were clapping for me, all I saw was the tears of the mothers of the martyrs, the pain of our Palestinian people. Here she says, no way, the world can have peace if Palestinians do not have peace. Winning was only a first step for the struggle. And as Palestinians, even with our winnings, we struggle. Even with the achievements, there's always struggle and challenges that we need to overcome. But at least what I did was to make people recognize the suffering of Palestinians. I taught the children I teach to break from pain, to have hope, to see the light at the end of the very dark tunnel they live through. She says at the end, it is our right in everywhere we live to have the right to return to our land. It is our right to continue to ask for justice. And without justice, there will be no peace. We have to bring peace to our children through justice. On our lands, childhood dies and suffers, but we still hold tightly to hope. And we know that one day we will return, and we wish peace and justice to every Palestinian.
Shukran, Hanan, for all the work that you do and for sharing those very intimate stories with us about what you do and the work that you do for the children in Palestine. Thank you again for sharing. We're going to move on to our next speaker. But again, before we do that, just a quick reminder, if you have the means, donate to UNRWA using going to unrwa.org, or donate.unrwa.org, and sign the petition at www.myreturn.net. Our next speaker, who I know, the only speaker I know personally on this panel, Amina Al-Ashkar, is a journalist, translator, activist. She is a Palestinian refugee in Lebanon, residing in refugee camps all her life. She is the granddaughter and great-granddaughter of survivors of the Nakba. Amina, nice to see you again, and thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having me, and nice to see you too, Nader. It's been a long time. Just to clarify, right now I'm in London, and because I'm doing my master's degree at SOAS University, and actually that would be a very good place to start with my story. I was, as Nader said, I was born and raised in a refugee camp in Lebanon, in Burj al Barajne, for my entire life until someday I was a speaker at the Nakba Tour, North America Nakba Tour, for 3 years. I went all over many US states to talk about the Palestinian refugee plight and conditions in Lebanon, accompanied with an 87-year-old Nakba survivor. It was really a pleasure. She was telling her stories, how she was in Palestine, how she lived, and how she survived the Nakba, and she's living right now in a refugee camp in Lebanon. And so as I mentioned, right now I am in London and I'm trying to finish my MA in Israeli studies. Why Israeli studies? Because know thy enemy, right? And now I'm going to tell you, I'm going to share with you this story, and through it you would get a glance of how are the conditions of the Palestinian refugees in Lebanon. I think we do have one of the most unique and the toughest conditions amongst all other Palestinian refugees and within the Palestinian diaspora. I mean, according to UNRWA files, we have, or documents, we have worse conditions than the Palestinians and the refugees in Gaza Strip. And given that we don't have any civil rights in Lebanon, so we also have a worse condition than the Palestinians in Syria. So basically, what happened is I applied for a scholarship to come to London and get my MA. And when I applied the first time, I was refused because apparently they didn't have a quota for Palestinian refugees. And then the second time I was actually I was admitted, and I was the very first Palestinian refugee to get on this, or to get this scholarship since around 20 years, I think. Why is this important? Because as many may know or may not know, that it is well known that within Palestinian refugees in Lebanon, not many of us can speak English. And because for some reason, Palestinians in the refugee camps of Lebanon, they only focus on the scientific materials, like, math, science, and all of that. They just don't care about the English for some reason, about languages for some reason. And so my father, this is the case in schools that are administered by the UNRWA. And this is why my father did not want me to get that type of education. He actually invested in my education, and he registered me in a private school. So I did get a very good type of education. My father had to work for 15 hours a day. He was a petrochemical engineer, but since he's a Palestinian refugee in Lebanon, and as a Palestinian refugee, you cannot work legally. You only can work, from under the table. He had to work for 15 hours a day in order to be able to pay for my tuitions at this private school, because obviously private schools are so pricey and expensive. So he had to work for so many hours every week with sometimes he didn't get to have his days off because he was a Palestinian refugee. And through my years in this school, I always thought that Palestinian refugees could not speak English, and I never tried to speak English. Like through my first, second, third, and fourth grade, I thought that I can't speak English. And everyone in my classroom, they knew that I was Palestinian, and it always felt like I was an outsider. And they would just, look at me as if, she's the Palestinian who cannot speak English. But, it's a big thing in Lebanon to speak languages, because that's all what they do. They speak a lot of languages, right? Hi, kifak, sava. So not being able to speak any other language than Arabic was, something that makes you stand out in a negative way. And I actually, until fourth grade, I just had this thought that I can't speak good English, and I just lived with it until one day, a teacher came and she asked a question, and I I didn't quite understand. I mean, she asked a question, I didn't understand it, but she was addressing another student, and someone just said, when I said, what did you say? A student of a friend of mine said, "Oh, teacher, just it's okay. You have to bear with her because she's Palestinian and she can't speak English." And at that time, the teacher was shocked because she said, "How come I am Palestinian and I can't? I am teaching you English?" And I think that was a very eye-opening thing for me. I was shocked, and I realized that no, as a that if I'm a Palestinian refugee living in a refugee camp, it really doesn't mean that I can't speak English. I can speak English, and right now I actually managed to get this scholarship. So what I'm trying to tell you is, through this story, is Palestinian refugees face a lot of pressure, a lot of discrimination throughout their lives inside in the refugee camps. You know, you don't belong to anywhere. You don't belong to the refugee camp, obviously, because it's a refugee camp. It's not supposed to be home. It's supposed to be a temporary place that lasted, unfortunately, for more than 70 years. And then you're not Lebanese at the same time. And you don't want to be Lebanese because you're Palestinian, but then your papers say something else because they do say you're Palestinian, but, you know, being Palestinian means you're either living in Gaza or in the West Bank, but you're living in neither. So it really just, you know, maintaining your Palestinian identity and maintaining your Palestinian attachment while being in a refugee camp is not something so easy. We try our best as Palestinian refugees, in spite of all of the pressure and all of the conditions that we face on daily basis. As I said, we are, for example, not allowed to work in more than 72 professions. We're not allowed to be engineers. We're not allowed to be doctors. We're not allowed to be lawyers, dentists, pharmacists. So it's really hard to just, you know, when you know that a lot of obstacles are ahead of you, just because you are a Palestinian person or a Palestinian refugee. And then you have another predicament, which is presenting your country outside of the Arab world. Because when you go outside, like when first time I went to the US, everyone would be like, where are you from? I would say I'm Palestinian, and they would say, where from Palestine? And because just saying you're Palestinian, it means you live in the West Bank or Gaza, which is not my case. I live in a refugee camp. It feels like every single time I have to talk about my nationality or about myself, about my identity, I have to go through a very long, lengthy history class for each one. I had to go through this even in airports, like why you're holding you're not holding a passport, you're holding a travel document. What does that mean? And it was really shocking for me that a lot of people around the world, even in countries that's supposed to know about you, like in the UK, they don't know why you are a Palestinian refugee. And it's really shocking because the Palestinian refugee crisis is one of the oldest refugee crises in our modern history. And some people just still don't know about you and that you exist. And I think this thing makes you, it makes us as Palestinians more and more marginalized, because as you may know, we don't have a political presentation. So this makes us marginalized. And then now we have these pressures exerted from Trump and Netanyahu to just shut down the UNRWA. And by this, it means that we won't have an actual presence in the international community. And this is why we hold on tight to UNRWA, because it is, as we say, it is the last witness, and it is the last institution or organization that still discuss that the Palestinians have the right of return, and that does not apply to statute of limitations. So, and by the way, my name is Amina and not Amina. But yes, so basically, this is how the Palestinian refugees are living. What I can say is, in spite or regardless of all the conditions of the Palestinians in Lebanon, we still hold really tight, as much as we can, to our right of return. We only believe that, and I think I share Lorena with what she said about the Chilean government, that the Palestinian, our problem is not with our hosting governments. It's not with the Chilean government. It's not with the Lebanese government or the Syrian or whatever government. Our problem is with with an entity that existed on our own land. It existed on our own. They just kicked us out and it existed itself. And this is our problem. And the only way to solve all these problems is just by returning, by allowing us to return. Because it's impossible. I mean, it's really impossible. It's outrageous that 70 years, more than 70 years, and there are still refugee camps for Palestinians. And I'm a third generation Palestinian refugee. This naming should not exist. This should not exist. This is unfair. This is injustice. And I just don't understand how the international community, who claim to be trying to just, apply justice and they allow something like that to happen and to continue to exist. I think as Palestinian refugees, the only thing we still have is just to exist. Our mere existence is a struggle, and I think by mere existence we are actually resisting. I think that should be it for me. Thank you so much. I don't want to just go too long on it, and I would be available for questions anyway at the end. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amina. I'm sorry for mispronouncing your name.
Okay.
But thank you again for sharing. Even Palestinians don't know the little intricacies of other, people that live in the diaspora and what they go through. I'm sure I was probably one of the people when I first met that asked you, where in Palestine are you from? Because
exactly, yeah, it happened. Exactly.
It does happen. And so it's very important that you come on here and speak your truth and talk about, what you go through and it's so great that we have so many different speakers from so many different parts of the world. So really quick before I let you go, what would it mean to you if tomorrow we all had the right of return?
Oh my gosh, it means that tomorrow is a knafe. We're gonna eat knafe. Well, I just can't explain that. I get too emotional when I just talk about the mere idea of returning. I do remember once when I went for the first time to South Lebanon, and I had literally just 2 meters away from Palestine. I was able to see the settlements. I was able to see Palestine, the Galilee, the Jalil. It was really just, I remember I just started sobbing, and, because it felt so unright and unfair that they're living, people coming from all over the world and choosing to live in your land, and then you going and returning back to a refugee camp that is just only 1 kilometer square and having more than 50,000 people living there. Can you imagine that? So I think it just means all my problems are over.
Inshallah. All right. Well, thanks a lot, Emma. Thanks again for joining us today. We're going to take a 10-minute break. And when we come back, we're going to come back with the rest of our speakers for this amazing event, Voices in Exile, to hear from a couple of more amazing Palestinians and hear what they had to go through and their experiences. So thanks again for tuning in. Stick around. 10 minutes. We'll be back.
Yıllar geçse de ömrüm bitse de beni öldürse de döneceğim bekle Filistin. لو مرت أعوام لو صلبت أحلام لو كسرت أقلام حتما ستعود فلسطين. العودة حقي وقراري وكذاك طريق الأحرار في جيبي مفتاح الدار سأعود لأرض فلسطين. العودة حقي وقراري وكذاك طريق الأحرار في جيبي مفتاح الدار سأعود لأرض فلسطين. Seni unutup gitmem, sensiz hiç olmam. Sevdim sever seveceğim, döneceğim bekle Filistin. لو طال الأسر لو محيا الفجر لو نفد الصبر حتما ستعود فلسطين. العودة حقي وقراري وكذاك طريق الأحرار في جيبي مفتاح الدار سأعود لأرض فلسطين. العودة حقي وقراري وكذاك طريق الأحرار في جيبي مفتاح الدار سأعود لأرض فلسطين. العودة حقي وقراري وكذاك طريق الأحرار في جيبي مفتاح الدار سأعود لأرض فلسطين. العودة حقي وقراري وكذاك طريق الأحرار في جيبي مفتاح الدار سأعود لأرض فلسطين.
If the petition letter being sent to the United Nations in order to solidify the right of return for the Palestinian refugees represents you, this is your chance to add your signature and make your voice heard. Enter the website at www.myreturn.net. Enter your details, your name, email, and the town of origin from which you or your family were exiled. Fill in the relevant fields to secure your data, then sign in the box. You have only completed half of the steps. To fully complete the form, you must log on to your email, and open the email from the campaign. If you cannot find the email, check your spam folder. Click on Verify to activate your signature. Congratulations! Your participation in the petition has now been confirmed. Return. My right. My decision.
Hello and welcome back to Voices in Exile. Just a quick reminder before we jump into our next speaker, if you guys could please sign the petition at www.myreturn.net. And if you also can, please donate at donate.unrwa.org. All right, now moving on to our next speaker. Our next speaker is Ahmed Abu Artima. He is a Palestinian writer and activist. He is the founder and initiator of the Great March of Return in Gaza. Born in Rafah in 1984, Abu Artima is a refugee from Al Ramla village. He has written hundreds of articles in Arabic and international websites. He has traveled around the US and Europe speaking about the Palestinian right of return. Hi, Ahmed, and thank you again for joining us. Very appreciated. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, and thanks for the organizers of this great event.
You may begin whenever, Ahmed. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks again for this opportunity. I'm Ahmed Abu Artima. I'm a refugee, a Palestinian refugee from Ramla. My family, as the majority of the Palestinian people, were expelled out from their original towns in 1948, and they went to Rafah, in the south of Gaza Strip, and I was born there. And I grew up in this very limited place, this enclave called Gaza Strip. Now there are about 2.2 million. This is the population of the people here in Gaza Strip. This makes it one of the most densely population place in the world. About 70% of the people in Gaza Strip are refugees. They are not originally from Gaza Strip. They are from Palestine, the historic Palestine, what's called now Israel, and they were expelled out by force in 1948. I would like to focus a little bit on the new generations determinally. The new generations have their special suffering in Gaza Strip. In the last 10 years, there are about 3,500 Palestinians inside Gaza were killed in the main Israeli aggressions, the three main Israeli aggressions, and tens of thousands were injured. The unemployment in Gaza Strip is one of the highest rates around the world. The majority of the people in Gaza and the new generations and the youth in Gaza, they never left Gaza Strip in their lives, so they cannot travel, and even they cannot go to the rest of Palestine, the West Bank and Jerusalem and the Palestine occupied in 1948. This makes Gaza very isolated in the world. So imagine the majority of the youth in Gaza, they never even they never saw a plane in the sky because yes, there are a lot of planes here in the sky of Gaza, but it's the Israeli war planes that means the death for the people here and the destruction. It doesn't mean the travel and the activity and the life like it's in the rest of the world. Israel ended its presence inside Gaza Strip in 2005, but it's still control in the people who can enter or leave Gaza, and it also control the imports and the exports of Gaza Strip. So the situation of Gaza is very difficult, and the youth in Gaza, in the light of this situation, they cannot have their basic necessities, their basic human necessities, like the work, like even the travel, like anything. They cannot even achieve. They cannot imagine their future. How can? So in this situation, also we take the political situation with Trump, when Trump became the president of the United States, when he announced that he will move the embassy to Jerusalem, and his speaking about the cause of the refugees was very was very it make us very worried about what's the future of the refugees. So in this environment, the idea of the Great March of Return came. Yes, I wrote a post in the beginning of 2018 that it was, first of all, it was like a poetry, like an imagination. Why not we are become like the birds? The birds can move freely, but we as humans inside Gaza, we are really inside a prison. Israel control the gates of this prison. So let us knock the door. And I inspired these words from Ghassan Kanafani. Why we should die silently. Let us try. Let us knock the door. And we don't have anything to lose, actually, because we are inside Gaza Strip without electricity, without medicine, without jobs, without future, without basic necessities, without anything. So let us try. Let us scream. Let us make our voices heard around the world. This was the idea of the invitation behind the March of Return, and it touched the hearts of the people inside Gaza. So this idea this idea reacted strongly among the activists, then among the people inside Gaza, and the majority of the factions and the NGOs and the political spectrum in Gaza, they adopted this idea. And yes, the people, this idea became a reality when we saw in March 30, 2018, more than 100,000 Palestinian refugees inside Gaza in peaceful protest. They carried the flags, and they carried the keys of their homes that they are still kept it since 70 years. And they said, it's our right. We want to return to our homes. And this was very important because it was the Palestinian response in the Israeli lies and in the Israeli propaganda. Israel also tried to make the problem is just a security problem with some factions or some militias in Gaza. But the Palestinian people in the Great March of Return said that we are the cause. The cause is ours. It's not the cause of a specific faction or the all the generations, the elderly people. We saw them in the Great March of Return. The youth, the even the children, the whole families, all of them participated in the Great March of Return peacefully, and they said that we don't forget our right, and we are still, after 70 years, we are still have the power and have the intention to return to our homes, and we will never leave our homes, our Palestine. If we will do, our move will be in the direction of the north, not in the direction of the south, toward Egypt, but we will move toward Palestine, toward our villages, like Ramla, like Yibna, like Sdoud. So this is our direction as Palestinian refugees. Yes, unfortunately, because Israel feels impunity, it decided to suppress this peaceful marches, and it killed more than 220 unarmed protesters. Unfortunately, no accountability for Israel. Israel didn't use the lethal violence against the protesters because it was under threat, but because it tried to kill the idea itself. It tried to kill the idea itself. The Palestinians, with the Great March of Return, said that we are stronger than the despair. That yes, we are weaker than Israel, but we have the faith and we have the insistence, and we will never give up. And this is our right. Yes, if this generation cannot return to their homes, it will move the message to the next generation or the generation after. But this is our
Beautiful.
right, and we will never give up as Palestinians and as Palestinian refugees. Yeah.
So beautifully put, Ahmed. Thank you so much for sharing with us. I know it's been 4 long years since that post, but you've inspired so many people around the world. And Gaza always inspires everybody, the people and the resilience. So to hear from you and to hear your perspective, thank you again for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Excuse me. Thank you. Again, please sign the petition, donate to UNRWA if you can. But let's move on to our next speaker. Osama Shaheen is a Palestinian refugee from Syria, born in the suburbs of Damascus and lived there for over 10 years. Osama was educated in the UNRWA schools, however, had to relocate to UAE and then the UK. He is now working as a structural engineer in the UK. Assalamu alaikum, Osama. Thanks for joining us. I think you're muted.
Oh, I'm really sorry. I was on mute.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you. First of all, thank you so much for inviting me for this. It's a very good opportunity to be talking here. I'm not as articulate with words as your other guests. Well, most of them are speakers and activists, but I'll try to do my best. I'll try to speak from my own experience. And yeah, just a quick thing about myself. Like you said, I'm Palestinian, born in Damascus. I've lived there for 10 years. So I was one of those people who were born, like with my grandfather telling me about how he displaced from our hometown, which is Tiberias. Maybe you've heard of it. It's in northern Palestine on the Sea of Galilee. I grew up as a child. My grandfather telling me about all these stories, how he walked from Tiberias to Damascus in Al Nakba. Yeah, unfortunately, I grew up in a. Actually, fortunately enough, I didn't grow up in Yarmouk camp, which was the overly populated camp in Damascus. I'm pretty sure some of you or all of you heard of what happened in Yarmouk, but I grew up in an area called Douma, which is the suburbs of Damascus. Maybe you've heard of it as well. I studied in an UNRWA school, which is one of in Syria, it was considered good in comparison to the governmental schools. I don't know about the situation in Lebanon, but the UNRWA school that I studied in Syria was all right. Just like anybody else who are in my situation, like Palestinian Syrians, we felt like we were dislocated. We felt like I kind of had this. This was like a problem for me, which was the problem of an identity crisis, a kinda identity crisis, because I didn't feel like I affiliate 100% of being Palestinian because I've never been to Palestine, I've never seen Palestine. At the same time, I didn't affiliate with being Syrian because I'm not technically Syrian, and maybe most of you know that the Syrian government does not grant Syrian citizenships to Palestinian refugees. So I was always labeled as a refugee for my whole life. I'm now 26 years old and I'm still a refugee. Hooray. Of course, this came with a lot of troubles. For example, we immigrated to UAE looking for opportunity. My dad immigrated in 2003 to UAE, looking for opportunities and stuff, better quality of life. At the time, things were easier for Palestinian refugees to go to UAE. Now it's a bit different. But this came with its own challenges. For example, my status as a refugee has always affected me, like opportunities, job hunting, visas. For example, in UAE, when I graduated from university, my visa got even though by the time I've lived in UAE for 10 years, my visa got rejected by the authorities maybe 3 times until we actually had to contact somebody who was well into the government who could help us, through WASTA to obtain the visa. I've been invited to participate in a scientific show in Qatar, but my visa got refused because of being a refugee. And then the worst of all was I was also refused from some girl's parents because of my refugee status as well, and she had like a proper Jordanian citizenship, but I was a refugee, so that also it affect the status of being a refugee. My whole life has affected me in all the possible aspects of life. It's a continuous suffering. I decided to change that about 2 or 3 years ago. I was said like, this is it. I need to do some change. I need to try and obtain a sort of identity to myself. I know, like I of course I identify as Palestinian, but in the eyes of the world, I kind of identify as nobody, like a refugee, like a subhuman. I remember one of my friends once said this unintentionally. He said like that we like Palestinian refugees are subhumans, and this word has stuck with me until maybe until today. Like I still think about it. Like it's such a cruel reality. So I decided to change that. I came to the UK. And I went through an asylum process in the UK. Thankfully, it worked out, and I'm still a refugee, but I'm hopefully on the way for a citizenship or an identity, which is what I sought my whole life. It's the ultimate goal for me. I know it's a different experience for every Palestinian. Some Palestinians would tell you that they don't really seek after identity or like a foreign identity or something. Some Palestinians will do, but this is the case for me. And of course, we had to go through. Maybe we are unique to other Palestinian refugees because we are kind of like double refugees. Because like I can't even go to Syria now because it's in a state of total collapse and chaos. We lost everything in Syria. We lost our houses for the second time. Like we lost our houses in Palestine. The one that were owned by my grandfather, and now for my father's generation, my father, for example, has lost 2 houses in Syria. My neighborhood in Douma was completely obliterated. My mother actually went back in January to check over it, and it's all rubbles now. There's nothing left. So it hurts to be refugees twice, let's say. But this is the reality of life, and we're trying to survive just like all the Palestinians out there in the world. Each one of us is trying to survive in their own way. Each one of us is suffering in their own way. I'm not saying that my suffering is different than is worse than if somebody else is suffering, but each Palestinian suffers in their own way. But we all share one common thing, which is the will to stay alive, the will to fight for our rights, no matter the form we try to fight for it. Well, yeah, this is our story. I wish I could tell you more about what's it being like a Palestinian refugee in Syria during the war, but I wasn't there at the time, so I cannot talk very clearly about it. I had relatives, of course, who fled from Douma. My aunt used to live door to door to us. She fled from Douma in 2012 after she saw like mutilated bodies on the streets and like different parts of bodies lying in the streets and dead people. So she just freaked out and she ran to Damascus to stay in my grandmother's house in central Damascus. Yeah, it's horrible. It's horrendous. They can't survive now without our help. Us who are living outside, we send them help. But yeah, it's. I don't want to keep talking because it's out of topic. But yeah, I just wanted to.
It's okay. It's okay.
From our perspective as a Palestinian, Syrian refugee. Yeah.
No, but it's great that you shared with us. I mean, I know how you feel a little bit, but I'm glad that you shared your stories with us. And honestly, like you said, you ended it on a really good note. We all do suffer in different ways. I'm very privileged here in the U.S., and I haven't gone through nearly what the other speakers have gone through at all. But I can definitely relate somewhat because I hear from family members who are there on the ground and stuff like that. But I appreciate your perspective, and thank you again for joining us tonight and letting us.
You are most welcome. Thank you so much.
Thank you. All right. And so our next speaker, and before I get to that, a reminder again, please sign the petition and please donate to UNRWA if you can. But our next speaker is Anas Radi, a grandson of Palestinian refugees in Gaza. He's head of media and public relations of Olive, a Palestinian youth organization based in the UK that aims to mobilize Palestinian youth by raising awareness, enabling and empowering them on their journey towards a free and peaceful homeland. Hello, and thanks again for joining us, Anas. How are you doing today?
Hello, not bad, thanks. Thank you very much, Nader. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the Return Centre in London for allowing me to be part of such a great panel. It's quite inspiring hearing all of those speakers from different backgrounds and stories. They all seem to have one common thing in point, which is that they never forgot their homeland, and they're willing to do what it takes to see a free Palestine. Like you said, my name is Anas, and I do come from a media background, and at the moment I'm the head of media at Olive, which is a youth organization based in London. When I talk about my origins, I usually say that I'm from Gaza, but realistically, my grandparents were exiled from a city called Asqalan, which is 13 miles to the north of Gaza. They were forced to flee during the Nakba and were told to wait in Gaza while everything was reorganized in Asqalan. And they'll be allowed back, which clearly never happened. I did go back, I did visit Gaza in 2018, and I was able to go close to the border, and where you can see Asqalan from there. It feels so far, yet so close at the same time. My parents came to the UK back in the 80s, and like many others, the main purpose they came here was for education. There's no official statistics as to how many Palestinians really there is in the UK, but it's assumed to be anywhere between 30 and 50,000. yeah, and the vast majority of them, like I said, came for education, which Palestinians do give a lot of importance to. If we look at the Arab world in general, the level of education is 79% on average, whereas in Palestine, it's impressively at 96.4%. So yeah, they always prioritize their education. Palestine, how we came to learn about Palestine came from a very young age, and there's many stories we can go back and think of. So I remember one of the eye-opening stories which made me think was I was in year 3, so I was roughly 8 or 9 year old, and in the UK here we have to attend assemblies once a week, and one of us, and on one of the times, which was close to Christmas, they made us sing a song. So they make us sing it, and then when they sing it, they explain to us. So the song was called "Let's Go to Bethlehem," and then they were telling us about Bethlehem and its importance in Israel and everything. And I went home that day, and I told my parents, "Oh, today we learned about Bethlehem and its history in Israel and place in Israel." And they were confused, and they explained to me, and they told me about Bethlehem and how it's a Palestinian city where Prophet Jesus was born. So the love of Palestine was unconditional. So and again, like I said, we felt the need to speak up and educate about Palestine from a very young age, because when someone used to ask us, when you ask anyone, where are you from, they'd be like, oh, I'm from this country, and you'd be like, oh, okay, and the conversation would usually end over here. Whereas for us in the UK, and this happens actually to this day with everyone, you tell them, oh, I'm from Palestine, and their reply would usually be, oh, Pakistan. And you have to reply with, no, Palestine, and you have to start throwing in keywords, so Jerusalem, Jesus, Egypt's neighbor, and then you'd have to try and explain what's happening from Palestinian perspective, which is always new to them. And this there has been because of this, that I believe there has been a lot of awareness in the UK over the past few years. There has been statistics, I think it's probably 5 years old now, that 70% of those of the UK citizens under the age of 40 support a Palestine state. So like I said, Palestine is one of those genuinely just causes, and I do believe that we all have a duty towards it. So from raising awareness to doing change on the ground, especially in the UK, we do have a lot of opportunities to do that. So whereas so for example, university work, we do a lot of that. We have the opportunity to, for example, talk to our local members of parliament. And ask them to speak in Parliament, or ask them to raise awareness. So finally, looking at the bigger picture, if we generally you feel that at the moment there's a lot of dismay because it's just way too complex. There's a lot of factors that show that the situation would be going on for much longer, but I do believe that this is the push that we've always needed and waited for. So I'm hopeful that the current political climate will be the climate we need to push to a free Palestine.
Thank you so much for sharing, Anas. We really appreciate that. I read some of that I resonated with, because even here in the US, you say Palestine and they go Pakistan. Yeah. So I really had flashbacks to horrible memories when you started talking about that. So, but thanks again for joining us tonight. We really appreciate your perspective. Okay, so let's, before I move on to the next speaker, again, reminder, please sign the petition and donate to UNRWA if you're able to. Our next speaker, our last speaker of the night, Lena Lina Abu Jarada is a Palestinian refugee in Jordan, originally from the Palestinian city of Yafa. She is an architect, artist, and activist. She uses her art to call for the Palestinian right of return. Lina has spent the last 10 years utilizing art mediums in order to tell the story of Palestine and the Middle East, including creating award-winning videos, controversial comics, and large murals. She has exhibited her artwork and spoke of the importance of peaceful resistance through art in countless events in Jordan, Turkey, Tunisia, the US, Ireland, and Argentina. Thanks again for joining us, Lina.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm just so inspired by all the speakers here today. And it really does show how resilient and stubborn we are as Palestinians. When you think about this idea that the world's superpowers, the United States, Britain, and now Israel, have been waging this war against Palestinians for over 70 years, whether that's through apartheid, occupation, colonization, massacre, propaganda, all in order to break the Palestinian spirit and to diminish our identity. And yet here we are today from all around the world, accomplishing great things and continuing the struggle for a free Palestine. And so I always say that we don't need to wait to be invited to the global table. We don't need to wait for the United Nations or international entities to acknowledge us or legitimize us. We need to defy all of these structures that have really upheld our oppression and create our own global platforms and voice and force our identities to the world. So I'm so glad that there are events like this that allow us to reach that global level and to give that voice to all Palestinians. And that's really what drives my work, everything that you mentioned, whether that's my activism, social work, artwork, writing, my teaching, all of it is really me dedicating myself to be excellent in order to reach global platforms and stand proud and tall and say, I am Palestinian. Last year, I had a really proud moment of standing in the United Nations and wearing Palestinian embroidery and giving a speech and mentioning that I'm Palestinian. And to me, it was such an important, victorious moment where I felt like I am representing Palestine to the best of my ability. And I'm saying to the world, here I am, and I'm Palestinian regardless of what you think. I'm also currently doing a master's in global affairs, and I was the first Jordanian Palestinian to get into one of the most competitive master's programs. And it was important to me because I wanted to be there in those academic circles and mention the Palestinian perspective and that narrative that they might not always hear. And so I feel like every single person, regardless of where you are or your skill sets, your talents, you can resist in your own way. You don't need to be a fighter or to live in Palestine to resist and contribute to us attaining that free Palestine. I wanted to go a little bit back in time and give you a little bit of a background of how I became so passionate about Palestine. I was born in Jordan. I grew up in the United States, and then I came back to Jordan. But my father was a refugee, and my grandfather was from Yafa. Up till then, I had no connection whatsoever to Palestine. In fact, I remember once in school, I refused to say I was Palestinian just because I thought it was so uncool. And I mentioned that I was Jordanian. And just looking back at that, like that shame and that lack of sense of identity, it's just so different to who I am now. And I know that many youth can relate to this feeling of not belonging or being kind of westernized and forgetting their identity. But all of that changed when I met my grandfather, and he metaphorically took my hand. He walked me through the streets of Yafa. We sat under the shade of orange trees and swam in the Mediterranean, all of that through his stories. He painted such a vivid picture for me, whether that was through his memories, the names that he remembered, the black and white photos he showed me, that I finally felt like I had a homeland. Up till then, I had felt lost in the world, and he gave me the most valuable gift of a homeland. He was really the one that embedded this love for Palestine within me. He had 11 children and countless grandchildren. His hands were very calloused, whether that was from the shrapnel from the bombings in Yafa in 1948, from having to load his possessions and children's onto a pickup in 1947, in 1967, or from 60 years of working to educate his children and siblings to give them a good life. He was a really great man. He passed away last week at 86 years old. And I was so sad that he never got to go back to Jaffa, which was his ultimate dream. But I do know that I will continue to do everything and dedicate my life so that I can actualize his dream. And it doesn't have to be through me. It can be through my grandchildren or their great-grandchildren, just as long as I know that return is a fact and that I'm paving the way for it. So I wanted to share this not only as a tribute to the wonderful man that my grandfather was, but also to fight against this idea that Israel tries to perpetuate, that the right of return is only for those first-generation Palestinians who were born in Palestine. The right of return is preserved for all Palestinians, no matter their current citizenship, no matter where they are in the world and which generation of Palestinians they are. This is our guaranteed and legal right. And there are so many legal frameworks that say this, whether that's UN Resolutions 194, 237, Articles 12, 13, 17 of the International Charter of Human Rights, or Article 49 of the Geneva Convention. This is our birthright, and we should never forget it or allow anyone to tell us that it's not our legitimate right. And so I basically use artwork to visualize the free Palestine that I want to see. And I think artists and writers have such a great role in resistance when we think about Mahmoud Darwish, Ghassan Kanafani, Najil Ali, because artists have this ability to visualize the intangible. And so when you talk to a lot of people our age, they've kind of lost hope after 70 plus years about, returning. But I think as artists, we're able to visualize the impossible and make it into a reality. And I just wanted to end by saying that it's so important for us not to lose hope. I mean, in history, there have been colonizations that have lasted much longer. The French occupation in Algeria lasted much longer, and yet they did gain their freedom. And so there's always hope. And I truly believe that Palestine will be free and that return is a fact, not just a dream, not just a hope. Thank you so much for having this event and making that a stepping stone to our return.
Thanks, Lena. And just like everybody else, very appreciative of your story and share, because I know so many people that share that sentiment with you that, they would only say that they're Jordanian and not Palestinian. And so I'm sure people hearing your words really resonated with them. So thanks again. Before I let you go really quickly, tomorrow, if the right of return was granted, what would that mean to you?
I mean, I'm one of those people that will actually pack up everything and just move back to Jaffa. Like, I have no problem because just from how tied I am to that. But it's just that basic human right. It's just justice being served, whether Palestinians want to go back or not. That's just something that should be granted to all of us. And in my mind, it would be such a joyous moment for, even displaced Palestinians within Palestine to go back to their hometowns or home cities, for everyone around the world to come back. And we share so much culture and identity, even outside of Palestine. So I feel like it'll feel like home, because that is our homeland.
100%. I agree with that sentiment 100%. I would, same thing. Next flight. So thanks again for everybody for tuning in. Before we end this amazing event, we're going to move on to the Q&A section. As the questions come in, I'm just going to shoot them out to whoever. I don't know who exactly is available to answer a question, but if you're there and you're willing, please answer, because all these questions, I think, pertain to any one of the speakers. One of the questions that came in is, what is the urgency of implementing the Palestinian right of return? And Lena, you could answer this, or anybody else that is. Go ahead, Lena, you could answer.
I mean, I think the urgency is, like, as I mentioned, this is a legal right. And just thinking about my grandfather and how in his final years, he had kind of lost hope that he would ever return. I think it's a tragedy that, the first generation of Palestinians are dying outside of their homes, outside of the cities and towns that they loved so much. And that's a basic human right, and I think that's pretty urgent for us to fight for. And I think the right of return is at the essence of the Palestinian cause. You can't say that Palestine can be free without giving that right to all of the Palestinians in the diaspora. So I think it's very urgent, and it's the core of our cause.
Wonderful. That very well put. I'm going to frame the next question to Amina. Welcome back, Amina. This question for you is why is, I think you kind of answered this already. Actually, you know what? Let's go to a different question that I think would work for you. Do you feel that any other entity than Israel has accountability in granting the right of return?
Granting the right of return?
Yeah.
So by granting, we mean that they have to allow us to go back, right?
That's how I understand the question.
Well, I do believe that working towards right of return is a Palestinian thing first and foremost, and so as a Palestinian refugee, I have learned throughout the past 70 years, not to wait anything from anyone. So I
like
think
that.
that's the question.
Grab it with our own hands. We can't trust anybody else.
That's exactly what I mean.
Pretty much what history has taught us. This next question that came in is for Ahmed. Do you think that the current Palestinian government should take example from the March of Return and unify across all parties and factions in the interest of the Palestinian people?
Sorry, again, please.
Sorry about that. Do you think that the current Palestinian government should take example from the March of Return and unify across all parties and factions in the interest of the Palestinian people?
Yeah, I think the Great March of Return helped strongly to give a powerful example. How can we Palestinians, by just popular ways, how can we make strong pressure against the Israeli occupation? And yes, the Palestinians before the Great March of Return, maybe they were between either the choice of the negotiations with Israel or the choice of the armed resistance, and both of the two choices were very limited and have a lot of complicities and restrictions. But the Great March of Return, the advantage of the Great March of Return, that it's a popular way. It's based on the international law. No one can condemn it. So I think yes, it's very powerful. But we as Palestinians and as the formal level in Palestine, we need to teach the lessons from these marches, not to be just like a historic event that it has been ended, but it's a strategic and very effective way that we should adopt it as a strategic way to achieve our national rights.
Of course. And Ahmed, I just want to ask you this as well, because I already asked our other two speakers that are in the Q&A right now. What would it mean to you if tomorrow the right of return was granted to all Palestinians?
It means that the justice won in this war, and this is important. That we are now in an imbalanced world, because there are millions of people, they cannot get their normal right to return to their homes. So we try to make the balance for this world again when we struggle for the justice for the Palestinians, and sure, including the right of return. So this what makes the struggle for the March of Return. It's not just a Palestinian cause, but it's an international cause to give a very important message that the justice has won.
We have time for one final question with this Q&A session. The question comes, and it's anybody can answer. Lena, go ahead, you could be first. What can allies do around the world to help in granting the right of return?
I feel like maybe our other speaker who hasn't answered a question might
Sure.
start
She
with
just popped up on the screen. Asela, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. If you would like to answer that question, or would you like me to read
Sure.
the question again?
Yes, please. Yeah.
The question was, what can allies do around the world to help in granting the right of return?
I think a good way to answer that question is that one of the ways that we lost Palestine is reflecting on how many people around the world in different countries around the world gave up on Palestine and had sold Palestine to Israel. So we can see how much impact that the surroundings could have an impact on whether change happens on that or not. So I would suggest that solidarity is one of the most important steps that could be done. And just to refer to my lived experience, I think within Australia, a huge part of the movement is based on the solidarity, whether it's that intersection with people from an Aboriginal background. I think the second step is actually putting Palestinians in the forefront of making decisions. Many of the decisions either made on a structural level are made by people who claim to think that they know what Palestinians want. So placing Palestinians at the forefront of decision making is a important step that could be done in order to ensure that that claim to be an ally is one that's genuinely based on social justice, not just for a certain image or a certain picture. Yeah.
Fantastic. I think that is, I've been told that we need to wrap up, and I think that's a fantastic place to leave it. Solidarity amongst everybody that is being oppressed. And I appreciate each and everyone spending their last 2 hours and 20 minutes with us in this event, Voices in Exile. Thanks again to the Palestine Center for having me chair this event. And again, thank you guys 1,000 times for being our guests and telling your stories. I'm going to wrap up by reminding everybody if they can please sign the petition at the My Return petition campaign at myreturn.net and to donate to UNRWA at donate.unrwa.org and to tune into the rest of Return Week. And the next event is Resisting Until Return tomorrow, December 9th at 6 p.m. your time, London. GMT, whatever that stands for. I'm sorry, I don't know what it stands for. I'm from the US, signing out from Chicago, Illinois, Nader Ahmoud. Appreciate you guys for having me, and what a great event. See you guys later.
الأرض